All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD1000 Web Development Technologies course, I'm creating a series of video presentations that are based on the textbook, or one of the two textbooks we're using for the class, that being Murox JavaScript and jQuery 4th edition, going through the PowerPoints and creating some videos based on that. So far I've done Chapter 1, Introduction to Web Development, Chapter 2, Get Started Fast with JavaScript, Chapter 3, Essential JavaScript Statements, and Chapter 4, How to Work with JavaScript Objects, Functions, and Events. Each one of these has been 2 different lectures. Now I'm up to Chapter 5, which I'm hoping at least I might be able to get done in 1 lecture, and that is on how to test and debug a JavaScript application. We got 3 things: an intro to testing and debugging, how to debug using the Chrome developer tools, and other debugging methods. So let's get started. Now we've had anywhere from 50 to 60 slides per chapter in here, and this one has 32, and that's why I say it may take a little bit less time. It's on testing and debugging. Here are our applied and our knowledge objectives, and there'll be some additional knowledge objectives on the next page. And the first thing to understand, as they say there, the goal of testing is to find errors. You should actually consider that if you've got errors in your program and you find them when you're testing, that's a good thing, because it's much better that you find them than it is that they get found once your application has been put into production. When you debug, you're taking all those errors you found while you're testing and you're fixing them. All right, and there's 3 basic types of errors. There are syntax errors, which are errors in the rules of the language. All right, so to continue on, there's 3 types of errors that can occur in a program. The first type of error, the first type of error is a syntax error, and that's an error in the rules of the language. It can be something as simple as typically, JavaScript does not require a semicolon at the end of a line, but there are exceptions. I don't want to go into those right now. But even doing something like spelling, like say you want to do an alert, and instead of alert, you type in alert. You'll leave the R off. That'd be a syntax error. All right, let's say you put in a beginning double quote for a string, but you don't put an ending double quote in. That's a syntax error. All right. Runtime errors are at least somewhat harder in JavaScript as opposed to most other languages. In JavaScript, typically, if you try to divide by 0, you're probably going to get the number infinity, which is actually what division by 0 is. All right. In some programming languages, the program will blow up and you'll get an arithmetic index error or something like that. But a runtime error is something that you don't discover until the program's running. An example of that in JavaScript would be if you were asking JavaScript to find a file and you told it to open up a file and the file didn't exist. All right. Logic errors, believe it or not, are probably the toughest to work with. And that's because we all think we're infallible. So if you mean to add 2 numbers and you accidentally subtract them, somebody else might be able to look at it and boom, like that, be able to see it right away, where the person who's writing the code, it might be harder for them to see it because they look right through their errors. That's why you probably have heard this kind of thing before, but in case you have not, when you're working on a program or whatever and stuff just doesn't appear to be working, sometimes the very best thing that you can do is just step away for a while. Literally, just step away. Go work on something else for a while and come back. All right, so the future value application with a logic error. Okay, if I'm going to invest $10,000 at 3.5% for 10 years, and I get back $10,239,964 or $1,964.20, that's got to be an error. Either that or I'm investing in that place. All right, so there's a problem in there. So what could it be? Well, it could be that you're when you're doing your math, that you're not, instead of multiplying by a percentage and making it out of 100. So if I attempt to multiply, let's say I want to multiply something and I want 10%, which should be 0.1. If instead I multiply it by 10 instead of 0.1, what is that? That's 100 times. All right, that's 100 times what I meant to do. All right, so you can, as it says, I already talked about the misspelling keywords, having caseness wrong, forgetting parentheses. There's all sorts of them. And a lot of the better ones or more common ones are mentioned here. All right, here's a reason why you don't combine camel casing with that snake casing that they talked about. All right. Problems with data and comparisons, not making sure that the user entry is the right data type before processing it, not using parseInt or parseFloat, using 1 equals sign instead of 2 for equality, using 2 instead of 3 for equality and identity. Floating point, we've already talked about the problems with floating point arithmetic. Remember that when you declare a variable and you don't give it a value, all right, it says if you don't use strict mode and you assign a value to a variable that hasn't been declared, JavaScript makes it a global variable. All right, so notice right here, it's going to go in here and it's going to make a brand new variable called sales tax. And it's different than that one because here the T is lowercase and here it's uppercase. All right, by putting in use strict at the top of the program, it'll find that, it'll give you an error. So here they fixed that future value. All right, and they fixed the error that's in there. All right, so here is checking to make, if you've got invalid data. What we're starting to do is, kind of run the whole gamut here. In other words, you're learning how to do things, but now you also have to learn how to, oops, I don't want it from the beginning, doggone it. All right, you want to think about how to handle things that you hope won't happen, but that might happen. Things like putting in a negative amount for the interest rate. Okay, so it says there's 2 critical phases during this testing. First, you want to test the app with valid data to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Then you want to test it with every bit of invalid data that you can think of. You do everything in your power to make it fail. As we already said, if you make it fail, it's a victory because then you can fix it. So as mentioned there, how to make a test plan, list all the valid entries you're going to make and the correct results for each set, the expected correct results. Then make sure the results are indeed correct. Then list all the invalid entries you're going to make. Now, literally every time you test a program, every time you run a program, you're testing it. It's just the way it is. Common testing problems, not testing with a wide enough array of entries. Not knowing what the results of each one should look like. Now, just so you know, one of the things that we'll look at, it probably in class, is we'll do something like this. We'll say let weight equal, and we'll do like a prompt parseInt, enter your weight. And we'll even give them a range so they know 1 through 777. I know that's bigger than probably we'd ever have to worry about, but you get the idea. All right. And we'll even give it a default. How about 200 pounds? All right. Now, when we are going through this, when we are going through this and we're testing it, what should we test? Well, one, how about a negative number? 2, 0. These should both fail, right? Because it's not within range. All right. Then you should also test for 7. Well, how about 1 to make sure it works? And then how about a value just like 234, something like that. So those two should work. Then how about 776? Then 777. Then 778. So see what we're doing? We're testing below the minimum, above the maximum, right at the minimum, right at the maximum, and then within range. Well, what else should we be testing? How about blank input? How about non-numeric input? So you start to see when you look at this and you're starting to develop a test plan, all right? There's almost 10 values right there for us to test. Okay. So as you're going through this, you should now understand what testing is, what debugging is, what a bug is, what a syntax error is versus what a runtime error is versus what a logic error is. As far as these throw an exception or throw an error, we will hit on that in class. An exception is an exception to the rule. I mean, if I'm walking down the street with my 4-year-old granddaughter and somebody comes up and says, what an exceptional child, I'll probably say, thank you, you're right. On the other hand, an exception in a program is an exception to the norm. It's a bad thing. All right, so we'll talk about exception handling, and I've shown you a little bit about errors already. Now, when you work with Chrome, there's actually 2 ways that you can work with it. I just want to show you both. I'm just going to bring up a window in the browser here. So this is what we were looking at. But if I right mouse click here and I choose View Page Source, strike that. If I right mouse click and I choose Inspect underneath View Page Source, that brings it up. The other thing that I can do is I can come in here and just hit my F12 key. All right. Well, that'll work usually. I guess I'm not technically in a web page. But if I go into Inspect here, all right, then what I want to look for is console. Now, these aren't my errors. These are errors actually on the page from Muroc. Don't worry about it. But I'm in the console now. So I can come in here and what can I do? I can actually do math. I can say let x equal 12 times 6. All right, now it says undefined, but if I type in x, notice it says 72 because that's the right answer. All right, so I can come into the console and actually do things if indeed I want to do things. All right, depending on what it is I want to be doing at that time. And when I go in and attempt to run a JavaScript program, if there are errors in my program, they will show. All right, they'll show in here. You already saw, not errors, but you saw the yellow warnings that came not from my program, but from the page itself from Muroc. All right, so I just showed you a couple ways to get in there. Okay, that's fine. When you go in and you start looking at what's wrong, all right, if you go over to under the console, I think it is source, it'll show you your code and it'll show you the line. You can go right to the line that found the error. As it says, if you click on the link to the right of the error, it'll be over here someplace. It'll take you right to, now where that error is, you might look at it and go, that's not an error. Well, it might be some code above it that caused that error to fire. All right, that can always happen. You can set breakpoints. If you come into the area that's in here, this is called the gutter. And if you click in here, so let's say I clicked here on line 31. The program will then stop when I get to line 31, and I can come over here and I can check values and the like that's in there. So you click on it to set it, you click on it again to remove it. Now there's a few entries that are here. There's a step into, a step over, a step out, and a resume. The step into is kind of neat. It allows you to run your JavaScript program one line at a time. You'll run it, it'll do whatever it is it has to do, then it'll stop and wait for another F11 to continue on. There's a step over. Notice it says run any called function without stepping through them. So if you had a function that was going to loop through something 1,000 times, you probably wouldn't want to go and hit F11 1,000 times. So you could hit F10 and have it just jump through that. All right. There's a step out, as it says, will execute. So if you're inside of a function, that might be better for the example I just gave you. And there's a resume. So if you stop the program, if it's running, for example, because you hit a breakpoint, you want it to resume, you could hit F8. All right. How to view the current data values at each step. Take your mouse and put it over whatever it is in the pane that you're looking for. So you can put it over this. All right. There's a locals window on the right-hand side. There's a watch section. The locals window will show you all the variables inside of where you currently are running the program. So whatever function or whatever you're in, you can put a watch on any variable so that when that variable changes, you can be notified. All right. You can run console.log. Now, I didn't really show you this, but notice if I come back into here, where was I? And I wouldn't typically do it like this, but here, you notice I've got X, but I can also say console.log, and let's put in our template literals, and I'll say X equals, and it says X equals 72. So I can log things out to the console here, anything I want to. All right, I can create stuff, I can grab stuff that was in the program or whatever. And here's some examples. Again, they use template literals. In the second example, I should get more used to using those all the time. All right, you can log out a whole thing. So this was the case where if, we're running through the future value, if I want to see what's happening each year. So there's where I start after 1 year, after 2 years, after 3 years, etc. Okay. Notice as it says here, what we're doing is instead of those alerts like I showed you before, if you put in something non-numeric or whatever, all right, we are sending it to the console. And notice if you send a console.error, it'll appear in red, and a console.warn will appear in yellow. Okay, and there they are. All right. There's something called the stack trace, and what that does is it'll show you every single routine that's been called by every other routine in your program. And it'll go from the most recent to the least recent. And if you go through the entire thing, it's known as unwinding the stack. So the reason that that will work and the reason that that can be good is you can make sure that the right routine is calling the right routine, etc. All right. And again, there's the HTML frame in there and the CSS frame, so you can check that stuff out too. All right. Now it says here, if your JavaScript code changes the DOM, you can go in and take a look at it then. All right, that's pretty much it for this chapter. Like I said, I didn't think, and I'm at 20 minutes, so it's about what I thought it would take. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to open up the next chapter, which will be chapter 6. And that's how to script the DOM with JavaScript. Now, whereas this particular lecture, we were able to get done in one chapter. That next one may actually take, or no, we were able to do it in one lesson or one video. This next one may possibly take 3. I don't know. All right. I haven't read all this ahead of time. I'm just coming in here and I'm showing it to you. All right. So we'll pick it up there in just a couple minutes.